How could you possibly imagine that which has been Forspoken would indeed come to pass?
I can't believe it.
Yes, Luminous Productions is being folded in.
Horrible news, because you don't want to see a game developer ever have to go away. But actually, this is fantastic news, because there's something that happens in video games as a whole. For years, it's been the people who took the L, the people who took the downfall, the people who actually felt the repercussions of failure would always be the individual developers. It would never be the publisher. It would never be the people making the decisions. But this time, this L is so massive that they released a game after a ton of delays, after a ton of marketing spend, immediately crashed it. And you're like, yeah, now the studio's closed. Fantastic. But the devs aren't even losing their jobs, mostly.
Yeah, Forspoken, it really must have performed badly. And I mean, we'll get on to, I imagine, Gary Whitta's comments later on, where he's like, oh, the work I did didn't really appear in this. This is one of those games we think that was probably just remade halfway through.
Definitely was.
So, overall then, what has happened? Well, per their press release, right? This merger is a part of their efforts to further bolster the competitive prowess of the group's development studios. Luminous Productions Company Limited is meanwhile equipped not only with AAA title development capabilities, but also technical expertise in areas such as engine development. Combining the two entities will further enhance the group's ability to develop high-definition games. But the real story here is that Luminous has had a pretty damn tumultuous time, hasn't it?
Yeah, hey, we've made two games and both of them fell short in the exact same ways, the exact same development issues, even though, you imagine not to do the same thing twice. Was it fooled me once, in a way, but Final Fantasy 15's development issues then led straight into Forspoken following the same problem.
Fool me once, fool me, creative business division twice.
Absolutely.
Haha, I'm sorry. So they were formed out of Creative Business Unit 2, which, of course, Creative Business Unit 3 is the FF14 people, and I guess 16 as well, because they just do everything. It's insane.
It's a bit hard to follow sometimes, because because there was the business division era, then the Creative Business Unit era, which sounds like, I don't know, Square Enix are strange. But ultimately, we didn't really know what sub-teams were until the business division era. And then the business divisions got moved into the creative business units. But we don't know which entirely. We know it was like 1 plus 7, 1 plus 6 moved into 2 or something. I can't remember exactly the details. But they basically shuffle things around in a way that you don't really know. I wouldn't be surprised
if there was a game called Final Fantasy, X 1 plus 6 equals 2.
At this point.
Given the naming. So it's all chaos, but basically they come out of the bones of the FF15 team. Which, of course, was originally Final Fantasy 13 Versus, and is one of those games that just, again, cost a lot of money and time to make. They had some pretty big ambitions, though. They said they strive to deliver new IPs with a wide range of entertainment content without limiting themselves to specific fields or genres, that they want to create games 10 years ahead of their time. Like Forspoken. So the goal was to use their familiarity, right, with the Luminous engine, which, in fairness, is capable of some really damn pretty shit.
Gorgeous,
yeah. To use their familiarity with that engine to work on a bunch of DLC for Final Fantasy 15, while then beginning production of new AAA IP and expanding into other media. Now, the first time we really saw something from the Luminous engine was Agni's Philosophy in 2012. It was that 3D, CG movie. Looked pretty damn incredible for the time. Square Enix have had massive ambitions there. Cracks did begin to form, though. So, Matt, in 2018, what happened?
The director of Final Fantasy 15, who took on the project to sort it out, just went, nope, goodbye. All the DLC we planned, nope, we're not doing that, goodbye. There's 3 or 4 of them were gone. And then the studio would change direction and move on to large-scale, high-quality AAA game titles. And $33 million gone. Just lost. Chalked up. Whoop, there you go. It's all... Whoops, we messed up our development. Sorry about that. Now, to be fair to them, they did do a lot of work on FF15 post-launch to actually bring it together into solving most of the core issues with the game and actually improving it to the thing where I haven't played it since launch, but talking to a friend of mine who loved it but played it on... I think he played it on PC a long time after launch, said it actually is a substantially better game than it was. It's just that's not part of the story. A lot of the story is literally just they cancelled loads of stuff for FF15 because it wasn't going the way they'd wanted to.
Including a full-length prequel movie, supposedly.
Thank God that got cancelled. Yep. I mean, I liked Kingslave. Don't get me wrong, I actually liked the Kingslave movie. I thought that was fine, but it was very much kind of what's the point here?
Yeah, so he goes in 2018, bunch of FF15 stuff is cancelled. They decide to go full-on ahead with Forspoken. the big game, right? And then the original writer, Gary Whitta, he then, well, we've since found out, revealed that the entire game narrative was rebooted partway through development. Apparently, he was contacted asking if he'd rewrite the new version of Forspoken's story, which revolved around interdimensional portals. And because of scheduling issues, he declined. So this is a game that is, much delayed, and then when it actually came out, that's where things are kind of rough. FF15 sold like 10 million copies, right, as of 2022.
Yeah, and also I think, well, it was a bit weird that they announced that, but it was either the weekend after launch or a week after launch. They were like, we have made all of our money back already. This game has sold so well. Thanks for buying it, etc., etc., etc. So it was, by all means, a success. It was just a success in sales, but not a success every otherwise.
And that's why it's a massive contrast to Forspoken.
Yeah.
Which I really do not think has done that well. And I mean, ultimately, it's quite surprising. Because a studio can have something that's not a hit, but it does the bare minimum. It does what it needs to, and they can go on.
Yeah.
But this is a case where evidently this failed to the point where they just decided to axe the studio. But a insightful comment that you said to me a few days ago is, don't mistake the spark for the fuel.
Yes, exactly.
And I have to imagine that Luminous, there's a lot of fuel there anyway for this to be the spark that gets the studio gone. Thinking about the development process for this game, it must have been a total shit show. I don't know exactly how or why, but maybe they just see, Creative Business Unit 3, with all of their broadly pretty well-handled projects, seem to be going quite well, and this mess. But this mess that is full of really good developers who can develop the sorts of games that we want to make.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part about Forspoken. Forspoken itself isn't full of... I guess the best way to describe it is it's a lot of, developed pieces. It's just like the core design pillars are kind of wrong, and they don't come together very well as an ultimate experience. In the same way that we just got done talking about the Suicide Squad game from Rocksteady, and you go, well, Rocksteady could make a fantastic game. They can make a game with absolutely... nails everything about that perfectly. But whatever part of this needs to make money, so make it in this genre, or whatever part of, oh, hey, that's a good idea, but actually we're going to pivot, or whatever part of maybe even, oh, that's a really good idea. So you could do it in a year. Yeah, show us what you can do in 4 months for individual systems and design parts. And you can see how that ultimately ended up being the result of just this game is kind of like, it's not really that inspired. The parts that are inspired don't come out very well. You kind of go, this is just a product of bad development, not bad developers, not even bad ideas, just bad development practices. And that's why I think it's obvious that they would shutter them immediately when you're looking at you compared to Creative Business Unit 3 there, where they're clearly, from everything, the people who go, we're not necessarily the most creative, not necessarily the most skilled, not necessarily the most talented, although you could look at some of Soken's music and maybe some of Ishikawa's writing, maybe disagree, but we know how to make video games. We have been in the mines grinding video games for a long time. We've had loads of reps that have released. We've had, here's a patch for FF14. Here's a patch, here's expansion, here's a patch, here's expansion. They have so much experience, whereas Luminous were like, hey, yeah, you guys, most of you made FF15 and that didn't go well. Here's another thing. And one of the things about the reference specifically to Agni's philosophy being one of the first things seen to them in 2012, Forspoken clearly is using a lot of Agni's philosophy ideas and stuff like that. I think it was some journalist who would be in the know said that both of them were under the codename Witch at some point. So you kind of go, was this maybe Final Fantasy Agni's philosophy? And they went, well, we can't Final Fantasy it, try something new. And it resulted in this kind of different thing. But that means they didn't release a game for how many years? Which means they didn't get to see what a finished game looks like. They didn't have that experience of going, that doesn't work, don't do it. That doesn't work. Well, that did work, let's do it.
Yeah.
They just have no experience. You go, well, you need to be working under people who know how to make video games.
And I guess when we get to that then, so the point is, this is like all kind of Square Enix people and assets that were spun out into this company with the idea, I suppose, that this company could go and make more video games so that Square Enix would have more IP, more games, more sales, more money, happy days. But it's an experiment that, kind of rooted in that engine, just did not end up working, right? It went pretty off the rails, pretty damn quick. We don't know if that is too loose of a grip for management. We do not know if that is just management having a lot of fear and, kind of micromanaging and things being bad. But then the thing is, when you look at Forspoken as an overall product, right, it's an open world RPG, it has no existing brand name attached or anything like that, and a long development cycle. But the thing is, if you're going to do that, then you need to be, I think in the modern market, you need to be reaching an immaculate standard of game. Sony have been able to do this successfully. Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon Zero Dawn, they both came out with a level of execution that I know that like people are a bit more down on Horizon now, but we still have to remember like what actually allowed that game to go boom, penetrate through the market and do super well. Whereas with Forspoken, unfortunately, just ends up being overall kind of mid in loads and loads and loads of different ways, right? And also mismarketed as hell. And that's one of the funny things about it. People have talked about, the writing and the characters and the performances being cringe. And yeah, they are totally cringe in the context of the marketing. But the funny thing is when you're actually playing through the game, as you were saying, no, she's not the worst protagonist in the world or, anything like that. It's just a perfect example of mid-game, so it's not good enough to outshine the sloppy marketing, and then sloppy marketing that had everybody laughing at it.
Yeah.
Like, when the game was just, look at this cool parkour and movement and spell effects, I remember people broadly being pretty damn interested in it. And it as soon as they started to market it in the direction of this, well, you know how they marketed it recently, right? As soon as that happened, that's when I really felt people start to turn against them. And then the game itself ends up being a disappointment on its own terms. It's just a perfect example of this is not enough. But it was evidently a humongous, expensive project, which I think as compared to maybe Voice of Cards, Harvestella, which I know you love. It's one of those games. I think Harvestella does have its issues, but it also is completely crammed full of heart and actual good stuff. Those are probably more safe, cost-controlled projects. Now, I don't know if Harvestella is going to end up being seen as a win. I mean, I know what it is for you as a person playing the game, but with its ratings and stuff, it's hard to tell.
Considering the budget that game clearly had, that probably did fine.
Grand.
They're going for the scattershot effect, and it's leaving people who are looking at from the broad scope, right? We tend to look at like a lot of you viewers will. A lot of you will look at the industry from a pretty high perspective, a pretty high up, like a top level down, like okay, what's happening? What's all this? And the only things that really shine in this front for us who look at it this way are the massive, super turbo, extremely good games. But I think that scattershot approach and that spread shot approach works because there's a lot of Square Enix fanatics that I follow on Twitter a lot of the time, and they are consistently overjoyed with output. They have issues with some games, but generally they're like, okay, this week I'm going to be streaming Square Enix release, and all of my followers will be like, oh yeah, I'm buying that game, that's great, absolutely having the time of our lives. And there's just loads of these little Square Enix communities having these are great games, absolutely, thank you, this is wonderful. So I think that's where a lot of their success ultimately lies. But I think I don't know exactly. I know so much of this I've seen theoretically is down to how Yuichi Wada ran the company up until 2013, and then how Yosuke Matsuda took over after that, and then turned the ship into what it is today. Obviously with help from all of the employees, of course, he didn't do the job himself. Yeah. But the day of this kind of approach of, okay, let's actually target IP, let's exploit our fan bases for optimal profit by releasing loads of games that they like and enjoy, I think is something that it was so contrasted to Luminous, who clearly started their projects in around the time Wada left. So they were just like, hey, we're making, in the same way that, you make a game and it's in 6 or 7 years, and you're snapshotted at 6 years ago in terms of what genres are important.
While under the older direction like Iwata, probably trying to make a game 10 years ahead of the rest of the industry.
Yeah, so it is the awkward thing where I think their development style and their entire management style might have just been a snapshot of when they spun out of Square Enix. Because if they spun out, obviously they were in the same offices as Alex Donaldson from RPG Set says, but I think it is a case of they maybe just were operating on a different operating system that didn't have the patches that the rest of the company has. And
I guess that's the main point, right? So they're ceasing to exist as a studio, but it's not as if they are located in a different country or a different city. Luminous is located in their HQ.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing. It's the studio's being closed. What does it mean for most of the people who go into work? They're going to continue to go into work in the same building, in the same office, probably in the same seat.
Yeah.
But I suppose it is going to be the level of management being reshuffled, how that, I suppose that human resource is deployed to achieve the company's goals. They've decided that no, these resources should go to how everything else is going. I suppose they probably think well, what do we want to just have them continue doing their thing? Or maybe would it be good if they assisted on FF16 DLC or spin-off or whatever?
Yeah.
And apparently this is something that they've kind of done before. The game designer studio, which was a separate shell company of Square Enix that was once absorbed by its parent, basically ceased to exist, never released a second game, as Alex points out. So this is something that they have done before. I mean, ultimately, this is probably going to save a lot of jobs. Or like this is a restructuring that is probably of minimal impact to people, but maximal output to like the overall company's resources. It's that kind of thing. Like we always, we kind of said like, well, with the Western studios gone, where's the hammer going to fall next? Obviously, Luminous of Forspoken is not some god tier game with 10 million sales or something humongous. So we've got that right, but also there's what it is: AAA. Open world, RPG. It's not like we have a humongous amount of them.
You don't have a humongous amount of them.
I mean, like, of the massive tier,
Yeah.
You only get so many Horizons or Tsushimas, and otherwise it's a bunch of midness. Man, mid really is the word of, like, the last few months.
Yeah, and that's the problem, where every game aspires to be Horizon. Every game aspires to be what like Far Cry 3 was to Ubisoft and that kind of open worldy stuff. Everyone aspires to make an Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Everyone aspires to make something like that, but there's no room for you unless you're better than that.
Yeah, Far Cry 6 can't be like Far Cry 3, because Far Cry 3, big, cool, good for its time. Newest Far Cry definitely pushes the boat forward in some ways, but also, it's the same thing. It feels like, again, this is, I think, an idea that we've really been drumming on about so much over the last 6 months. It's like, this is an entry in a genre, in a gameplay format, but is it really what it needs to be? Whereas you look at Far Cry 3 was very different to Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2 was a game designed wholly around the idea of you being this mercenary in this African country, and its mechanics, all of that was like designed to evoke that feel. Then Far Cry 3, what's the design of that? Well, it's kind of like psychedelic island madness, I suppose that's what you could say. The crazy characters like Vass, who is fantastic. And Far Cry 3 was completely tailored around that. But they've just kept on doing the same thing again and again and again. The level of creativity from Far Cry to Far Cry 2 and Far Cry 2 to Far Cry 3 didn't really happen. It's like it stopped, and they started making safer entries in the franchise. I suppose games that have just that level of this feels like a thing we've seen before.
Yep.
That's really the issue. It's, a good example of us with Pale Beyond. We didn't want to make a visual novel. We didn't want to make a super hardcore resourcey sim management game. We just thought, what are the tools that we have? And with our tools, how can we give people the biggest feeling that this game is trying to evoke? We didn't have any genre considerations. We were just trying to make it as much, could we add a mechanic in here to help reinforce this point? Yeah, sure, that mechanic makes sense for the game. Rather than, we've made this, now we're going to make another game in the same format. Right? Because, I don't know, it's, I suppose, just how Risk and stuff works. And you feel like, you've got one hit, so that's, in the case of, like, a lot of this AAA stuff. And, yeah, you can repeat it with Far Cry 4. I played Far Cry 4 and 3. But then 5, and then Primal, then 5, and then people just start wandering away. And I think when you're making games like that, but not having very significant and obvious improvements between them, because it's just, we've worked out broadly a Far Cry game, let's go do content, or in the way of Forspoken, it's just, open world. It doesn't really push any boats forward. Whereas if you look at Ghost of Tsushima, it's actually a very traditional open world game in so many ways. The point is that the level of execution is masterful in almost every way. That's why people are, even though I definitely have criticisms of that game, I think that's overall why people really liked it. It didn't feel like an Ubisoft map marker game, because its version of that was the really, really nice, cherry blossom petals blowing in the wind in the direction of your objective.
Yeah.
It's like those touches of creativity that really make...
Yeah, it's not that those choices fundamentally change the game from a literal perspective. It's the framing of it. You go in and you go, this isn't like one of these because it feels different. It's about how it feels, not about how it is, which is weird because you go, Forspoken, Forspoken had a lot of really different parts. It had the parkour that feels pretty mostly okay. It has a combat which sucks a little bit and then opens up a little bit more and gets kind of fun-ish in the close your eyes and smash R2 and fall asleep kind of way. Which is, obviously that's fine for some. Some people want something a bit more complicated. But, it's fun enough. But the problem was you go in, you go, map markers. You have not differentiated yourself in a way that people really feel immediately. You log in, you just play the game, you go, Oh, it's one of these. Again, I don't have time for a third of these, for a second, for a third, for a fourth of these, especially because one thing we also talked about when talking about the Suicide Squad game is saturation and how people feel about that. Where if you're aiming for the core market, you have to have something the core market want, and if the core market just got finished playing Horizon Forbidden West, or just finished playing God of War Ragnarok, what's the chances they're going to pick up Forspoken, which is a game that obviously very different, but is so similar in how you approach it and how you play it. You're like, oh yeah, here's my linear like open worldy game where I do the linear things and I take a break between the open worldy things, and it's all the same, but like I'm slightly pressing different buttons.
Yeah, the way you could put it is safe in the way that a God of War Ragnarok is, like, in a way safe, but that's kind of okay. Not everything has got to be a weird experimental thing. Yeah. But if you are taking that, like, more safe approach, you just need to do it at such a high level of execution and mastery that I suppose for these big AAA companies, a problem they run into is a lot of the smaller, more creative ideas they could do, like the hi-fi rushes of the world, say, they just have a cap on how many people are going to play them, or at least the industry maybe thinks that.
And also, interestingly enough, how many people can work on them. Yeah, I think that's another issue that Luminous would run into if they're a big studio.
Yeah, if you're a big studio, you have to make big studio games. And if you are Destiny 2, and there's a content train. If you are Apex, there's a content train. World of Warcraft, content train. That's okay, because it's more content for people to do in this game that's a platform. But for a one-off $60, $70 game, 70, challenging. The bar for success is very, very high. And I think that means that a risk-adjusted, almost one may say Blumhouse production style doesn't work for these big AAA games. What I mean there with Blumhouse is they put out a lot of horror movies. But their business model was like, we'll do loads of cheap horror movies, and some of them will be runaway hits. Some of them have been. And while some people think, oh, Blumhouse, load of shit. No, Blumhouse have actually... They are behind really critically and artistically acclaimed movies. It's just they have a fairly different approach. And funny enough, it's an approach that does make a lot of sense in indie games. It's pretty normal, actually, to be the indie game publisher approach. And funny enough, Blumhouse themselves are actually doing game publishing now. And then when you take a look on the side of these AAAs, well, they're realizing we actually don't have that many bets. We cannot do a strategy like that, so we have to focus ourselves on big 400-person team games. And I think that ends up in a kind of weird situation like this one, where, man, unless you are as good as Sony and you have that just sense of prestige and everything, which I don't think Luminous did, and, you know, even a game like Days Gone struggled being a Sony. It's just, if it had... Because I know Days Gone absolutely has its fans and has its things that it was trying to do really well. But as far as the Sony big blockbuster first parties go, it wasn't as critically well received as the other ones.
I also have a very fun theory that I'm sure people in the industry have gotten onto this now. People want something new, or they want something familiar that's better. And that's the thing. If God of War Ragnarok released but was not God of War Ragnarok, people go, that's pretty good, but also kind of meh. I think you get so much leverage of, oh, I want to play the sequel that's the same but better. But that lets you get away with being much later in the timeline because people go, oh yeah, God of War from, what's it, 2017, 2018?
There's legitimately a lot of competition in the games market.
Yeah, so if you don't have that...
It does just so happen that Sony is in control of many, many of these prestige studios that are able to create these... What they say about Luminous trying to make games 10 years ahead of their time. Yeah. That's the feeling, I think, that a lot of the Sony games ended up giving. Like, The Last of Us Part 1 felt like a cinematic sort of... Whatever The Last of Us Part 1 is. It felt like that, but a few years ahead of what the rest of the industry really was doing, and that's why people were kind of inspired by that. And I think just obviously Luminous set out to do that. It ended up not doing that. And we are seeing this happen again and again and again and again. Like with, hey, we've made a Battle Royale with our IP. Hey, we've made a Battle Royale for some reason. It's like, unless you can somehow come out and make one that Fortnite players find more fun than Fortnite, that has more content than Fortnite, that has more reward motivational stuff than Fortnite, it's hard. And that's the thing about all of these... You know, there's a lot of like network effects in those like battle royales that kind of they move you towards a winner takes all, they move you towards a sort of a duopoly, right? With, of course, space for some smaller entries. I'm beginning to realize that for quite a lot of other games, that's just the bar is set so high that a normal AAA game people don't really care as much. They're kind of off playing different sorts of games. It's a wonder that with Assassin's Creed, they've been able to actually turn it into this almost live game-like experience that people just put a lot of time into.
Well, I think that's the thing. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was played by enough people that they were able to live servicify it.
Yeah.
If they released another entry, I don't think people would go, oh, I'll buy it. Because the thing there is...
Well, that's what happened to them with Syndicate.
Yeah.
Right? They just kept on doing Assassin's Creed of a template, Assassin's Creed of a template, Assassin's Creed of a template. And this time we'll put a friggin' tower defense in for some reason. Yeah. And it ran aground because even with their really strong IP, the format of game people just ended up wandering away from because they weren't innovating enough.
Yeah, and also there's a part of this is interesting where comparing the live service version to here release a new product version. Because I think a lot of people say, well, why do they do live services instead of just releasing expansions, instead of releasing sequels? And the answer is, whenever you go to buy a sequel, you have to make the decision to buy a new game. Whenever you play a live service, all you do is play a game you already own. And then maybe you throw a little bit of money in for the new content. Maybe you don't. We'll see. But I think it's that purchase decision of here's an inflection point where the consumer is asked, is this worth my time? And consumers, upon seeing that and reflecting, will go, actually, you know what? I don't think I have room for another 80-hour game that is full of busy work, because I just finished an 80-hour game that's full of busy work and it was pretty okay, but I'm kind of tired of it now.
And also this is expensive.
It's especially now where even Theatrhythm, right? Theatrhythm just come out, and it's 50 quid. But it's 75 quid to get all of the first season pass of DLC and also a bunch of extra digital deluxe version songs. Which, to be fair, considering there's 20 billion songs, I'm like, that's okay. But I'm not going to buy the inferior version 50. I want the full version. And I just went, I don't have time for that. Would I enjoy it? Yes. I would enjoy that a lot. But do I have time for it? Not really. Do I feel like I can sit down and play a game that, requires so much time to get all of the value out of it? No. I don't. I would much rather, and I can't believe I'm saying this already, I'd much rather just piss about with a couple of games on Game Pass, because I get a lot more interesting experiences without the cost. And obviously, that's for me, who would absolutely love and play Theatrhythm for hundreds of hours. I'm just like, no, I'd rather have something a little bit different. And that's the problem, where I think AAA is going to come up against changing habits in a way that I don't think they're expecting. I think they're on the gravy train and just trying to get on the gravy train as long as it'll last. So I hope someone in some big publisher has plans for solving this problem in terms of making interesting games when they come out. But I will say, the one thing about this entire story that I very much enjoy is that Luminous Productions actually taking the L, and hopefully all keeping their jobs, which is very different to, I guess, remember back in the day when EA were the studio killers, or even slightly before that when Microsoft were, and their idea of killing a studio was taking everyone at the back and, sorting them out and go, all right, go find jobs elsewhere. Whatever this is, we're just going to cut. In this case, at least it seems to be the L has been taken by Square Enix going, no, this method of development doesn't. And maybe there's some part in my head is maybe Yoshi P was taken into this discussion.
Well, in fairness, he does just wander into your thoughts anyway,
yeah, he does
pretty regularly.
Yeah. To be clear, a lot of that today is because the FF16 previews went live and he's had some interesting conversations today. Some of them people are a little less happy about, but just basically throwing
that's a problem for later.
Throwing shade at FF15 basically, which is sort of fair. But I think he probably walked in and went, okay, what's the problem? Yeah, these guys are bad at making video games. All the devs are good, but just fire them into the pit and maybe we'll make use of them later. But don't get rid of them. We know the problem is that the development, the production angle's wrong. And that's what I've been talking about for I think the past year on this channel is production's wrong. Video game production wrong. Video game development is fine. Video game production is wrong.
Look, I can say from us going through stuff with Pale, when you're an indie and you're a startup, maybe the company founder who's also programming the game, doing a bunch of writing for the game, maybe that person's also producing the game.
Yeah.
And you have some production help with your publisher, but the first thing when we have funding is one more programmer, one more producer. Absolutely vital. And when people look at FF14, they think, oh, look, it's this mysterious wizard man. His name is Yoshi P, and he just knows everything about games, and he makes the best. When, look, maybe half that's true, but the thing that he's, actually really good at, the thing that is his background, is games production. It is him he's probably a real friggin' whiz with pulling an Excel spreadsheet out, or using some project management software, and planning a project, and keeping things on task and on time. Because ultimately, what causes a Forspoken to get rebooted? It's Pre-production is probably banjaxed.
Started-
Probably went too early into full production. Then the full production's banjaxed because the pre-production wasn't done properly. Now you've got to soft reboot the game, maybe hard reboot the game. Now you're saying, Gary Whitta, please come back. He says, no, I'm Gary Whitta, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what do we do with Forspoken? And then this happens.
Yeah.
Production.
I've figured it out. So I don't know how common this phrase is. I know it's a pretty common in the UK. Measure twice, cut once.
Oh, yeah.
The video game industry has long been a sort of maybe try to measure a little bit and then just hack at it all day long. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And this is a case of where it very much didn't. And the studio's gone because they didn't know how to measure twice. And hopefully they do learn the lesson of measure twice. And hopefully every other studio sees this and goes, look at Forspoken, what a big load of shite. How'd that come out? Oh, they didn't measure twice. Right, measure twice, cut once, make the game proper. And obviously that's not measure twice as in do 2 big whole pre-production plans and then go. It's more measure as you go. Measure, cut, was that correct? Yes, okay. Measure the next thing, cut it, go.
It's about the cycle of feedback, right?
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Feedback loop within the company, yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So there we go.
Yeah.
That's
What a
that's
day.
the crack. The lights went out at Luminous, but I mean, only because it's the end of the day, because they're going to come into work tomorrow in the same office building anyway. It's
Hopefully,
just
yep.
they will be a part of some part of Square Enix rather than Illuminous. So that's the story. If you'd like to check out some of our own development story, you can check out our documentary series of the making of The Pale Beyond, which you can see over on the Bellular Studios YouTube channel. And with that, see you next time.